the ability to recover from alcohol or drugs or sugar is to accept the idea that possibly we are, in an evolutionary perfect storm, a wrong turn that just like tobacco, we were not supposed to ingest this stuff. And you have to just accept it. And it's hard culturally. That's the problem. It's hard culturally.
Hey, Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Cher. I really appreciate it. It's an honor. Always an
Yeah.
honor to spread the message about this stuff.
And this is an important conversation. So I actually want to start off by saying that I am sugar free right now. And when I tell people, yeah, right? When I tell people I don't eat sugar, they always look at me really, really weird and question if there's something wrong with me, especially if I'm at a birthday party. And I always feel like I have this need to justify myself and explain myself. And this has been a long journey. I have removed sugar in the past for usually for quote unquote diet or health reasons.
Right.
But why this time has stuck and now I'm a person who doesn't eat sugar has actually more to do with how I feel, how my brain is working, the chronic pain in my body. So I've had surgery on my back a couple times and I'm an athlete. So I've got all kinds of things in my body. And when I
Yeah.
don't eat sugar, I sleep better. I have way better gut health
Right.
and all these other things. And so I know you're a big advocate to that. And one of the first things that you introduced as just a concept is sugar being this original gateway drug. So before we dive into all of that, I think
Yeah.
we have to first introduce you. So share with us a little bit about yourself, Mike.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. I have the kind of podcast version. It usually brings up more questions than it answers, but it really kind of started a couple generations or a couple generations back. My grandmother died when my mom was only 8 years old. And when she passed away, my grandfather had to move in with his aunt. Well, she wasn't the nice, or my aunt or his sister. It wasn't the nicest woman in the world. But anyway, they owned the country store across the street. And my grandfather made a deal with his cousin Jim. Anytime my mom walked into that store, she could have any candy she wanted, just put it on his tab. Well, that led to a problem because my mom believed sugar was love. I think she passed away believing that. And that's how I grew up. Okay. I was just covered up with sugar all the time.
Mhm.
And we had unfettered access to the sugar bowl. We could just put as much sugar on our cornflakes and cereal. We were literally scraping a half an inch of sugar with the milk and eating it at the end. Just literally eating just sugar with milk and whatever, Cheerios flavor. And anyway, fast forward, I had candy and cake and cookie. I mean, everything. My mother was basically our using buddy. She would, by the time grocery day came around, 3 days, 2 days later, all the sugar was gone. We were making
Oh,
Kool-Aid with 3 times the recipe, and it was ridiculous. Well, fast forward to about 14 or 15, I ran into beer. Now, this is an important part of our discussion. I knew that beer made me feel differently. We used to call it liquid courage, right? And so I would, we would drink behind the high school, and I ended up like being able to talk to girls because I was kind of shy, right?
right.
But I didn't realize that during my youth, and this happens a lot, you mentioned the original gateway drug, that I was soothing myself, right, with the sugar. Didn't know, and I don't think anybody puts this together because it's so ubiquitous and almost free. And it's a real important, like I said, part of the arc of a podcast for people to understand this concept that children are soothing. They're not looking for that sweet taste. They're looking for a dopamine hit. So if they're worried or fearful or angry or upset, they just say, let me, I'll get some sugar. And well, you know, most recovering people, and I know them because I'm open about my story, come to my program and tell me that they can't quit the sugar. Like they literally go right back to it after they get sober, right? And this is pretty much everyone, right? Anyway, keep going. And my kids, I raised a couple of sugar-free kids during that time period. They said, Dad, you should write a book. I'm like, I had a regular job, a regular life. I wasn't going to do that. But I did in 2018. I finally wrote a book. and I was kind of semi-retired, and I started coaching at that time as well. Like I had sugaraddiction.com in 2009, and I gave away great information, and some people kind of took it and ran with it, but really they didn't, you know, no one really got great results. Oh, it was just information, anything you could have Googled, right? Well, after I started coaching, I mean, kind of a unique phenomena happened is that I was pretty geared up. I had support meetings daily, lots going on. We had trained a few coaches. And when the pandemic hit, all hell broke loose,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Hmm.
So you saw the pictures in the grocery store. They bought out all the sugar, they bought out all the flour, all the soda, all the candy, and people were hibernating, baking and gaining weight. And more importantly, they were using Zoom. Like they had need to meet, have Zoom to just to talk to their family or, it just exploded. So we were ready for that. And then since then, it's just gotten bigger. And, we have, 4 or 5 support meetings every day now. But, that's kind of the short version how I became the sugar-free man. The sugar-free man came in like, I don't know, right around that time of the pandemic and it kind of stuck. So I go by that thing too. So
Wow.
that's the short version of how I ended up as the sugar-free man.
Wow. It's so true what you said, and you made me remember during the pandemic. So I do buy some of my stuff from Costco. And I remember during this time, I had never seen so many products, so many desserts and chocolates
Mm,
and cookies. And I mean, and Costco is usually, I mean, very abundant in these types of things. But I remember during the
right.
pandemic, it like quadrupled. I had never seen all of these things. And it's so true. And what I'm curious about your story, if we would rewind a little bit. So, when you were a teenager, you found alcohol, you started to notice it gave you confidence and you started to use it to soothe. And then
Yeah.
it seems like you created a link between that and sugar. So,
Yeah.
how did you first of all get over any of these substances? I mean, I think my question really is how bad did it get? How bad did it get in, to the point where you knew you had to do something about it? How was this interfering with your life? And more importantly, how was sugar interfering with your life? Because a lot of us will see alcohol or drugs or any of those other substances as drugs that actually interfere with our productivity and our quality of life and so on. But we may not necessarily view sugar in the same way because sugar is very much associated with just diet and weight loss and maybe diabetes if you have it or other side effects of that. So
Yeah.
can you expand a little bit in your story
Yeah,
around
no, it's a good question and very relevant to the discussion we're about to have, and that most fitness people, quote unquote, don't really get grasp is that I drank till I was 28. I got sober at 28, and it was a nightmare. I mean, it was crashing cars and wet in the bed, and it was everything. I mean, it was just really getting arrested, the whole thing, and I got sober and I wanted to get healthy, basically.
that?
I wanted to change that. But I ended up finding out that I was treating sugar just like drugs and alcohol. Like I was 16-ounce Mountain Dews. I was drinking 6 or 8 of them a day. This is before energy drinks, the highest caffeinated beverage on the market, and one of the highest sugar beverages on the market. And plus, cake and candy, and I didn't really eat much real food, pasta, bread. And so I was eating ultra processed carbohydrates and sugar because it was just an extension of the addiction, right? And I had rosacea and bleeding gums and adult acne, and it was terrible. And so anyway, fast forward, I kept going on the, I've been sugar free, flour free, and caffeine free for 35 years now, right? And yeah, I mean, but it took a long time back then because no one ever believed what I was talking about. Like the folks that in my recovery groups are saying, "You're sober today, Mike," these old guys, and I say, "Yeah, well, don't worry about the sugar." And so it's been a long time, but it took a long time. It took me a year to get off. I did it in this order: a year to get off caffeine, a year to get off sugar, and a year to get off flour. Like I just kept going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, because everybody thought I was nuts. But one of the reasons I did it is I read a book called Sugar Blues by William Duffy. It
Mm-hmm.
was written. in the late 70s, and he ended up marrying Gloria Swanson, the famous movie star, and they promoted the hell out of that book. And so I ended up reading it, and there were a few people. There weren't really even any food groups back then, a couple, but not many. But I mean, the most important part as we move forward in talking is that I realized that there was a connection. But more importantly, I didn't think it was identical or just as bad or whatever. But, the first 20 years of my career, I helped alcoholics and drug addicts get sober and get off drugs. And I started in late stage food addiction, and I knew those folks had a problem. But when I, got more out into the general public, it was like people were, how should I say this? They were, the addiction is identical, right? And it's just as powerful. This is where the misnomer of emotional eating was born or birthed, okay? And it's truly a misnomer. Yes, it's comfort food. Yes, you are numbing yourself like alcohol and drugs, but it's the dose makes the poison, meaning, we're taking a little alcohol, a little heroin, a little whatever, but we are pounding 30, 20 teaspoons average. You got any habit at all, it's 30, 40, or 50 teaspoons a day. A regular 12-ounce Coke, not a 16-ounce, a 12-ounce Coke is like 12 or 14. It's like, so people like you start to realize if you ever get sober, if you get off sugar, you realize it's the emotional draw, not the sweet taste on the tongue. And when people make that connection, then they move forward. Otherwise, they're just in this ridiculous cycle of the diet industry of eat less, exercise more. And 90% of people come to me for weight loss, 85, 90%, or they got a type 2 diabetes diagnosis. But and goes to your point in your question, is like when they lose 100 pounds, when they put type 2 in remission, that's not the first thing they're excited about. The first thing they're excited about is that their brain came back online. They remember better, they focus better, their anxiety is lessened. And but you lost 100 pounds. He said, I don't care, man. I can think again. I can do my job again. I've made more money, whatever. So it's interesting that the connection is not made. The reason it's made for me is I think, because I've been open about my drug and alcohol recovery, is that um, the people that come to me that are recovering 5 years, 10 years, 20 years sober, to a man, to a woman, Sherry, they say quitting sugar was harder. And these are addiction savvy people. These are people who they know about this stuff and they started reading about this stuff, but they still couldn't put it down without help and without group support. So,
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's really big. And we don't technically need alcohol to live, to survive. We don't
right.
need drugs, heroin, cocaine, etc., cannabis to live, but we need to eat to live. And the majority of our food right now contains sugar, contains
Right.
refined. I mean, the majority of what's even marketed to us as
Right.
health food is refined foods. And
Yeah.
so that's what makes it really challenging, is that we do actually need to eat in order to survive. And we do feel hunger and physical hunger, and therefore we require food. And so I think that's where it starts to get tricky. And, in the past, I never really used to look at food addiction as an addiction. I always looked at it as there's certain needs that are needing to be served that are not being served. So
Mm.
Tony Robbins talks about this a lot, the six human needs. And anytime that you have something that you're addicted to, it's because it actually meets three out of those six human needs. We have a need for certainty, uncertainty. We have a need for love and connection. We have a need for contribution. We have a need for growth. We have a need for significance. So if I have sugar or if I have a particular substance that I consider myself addicted to, it's because it gives me certainty. It's something I can always count on. It gives me variety. When I feel bored and I need to change it up, I will move towards that. It gives me maybe significance. It actually makes me feel alive in the moment. And that's
Mm.
also why I'm moving towards it. So it's really interesting to see it in different facets. But I'm curious in terms of your definition of addiction. How do you consider something an addiction, and how can we actually start to look at it in this way so that we do take it seriously and we do actually start to notice that if we remove it completely from our lives and we actually start the recovery process, then that's our path to healing.
Yeah, I mean, the people, I get a lot of pushback because it's, not named in the DSM, the
Yeah.
Diagnostic Statistical Manual, or the ICD-10, which is the World Health Organization. But there are work groups. There's a big one in the ICD-10, 40 people, 30 some odd of them have been on my summits. It's like these are people who are working to get it into the ICD-10, the World Health Organization, to name it. And the same, there's also a good work group here in the United States to get it into DSM, Ashley Gerhardt, the University of Michigan. And I think when that happens, and you can go to treatment for this, or your insurance can pay for treatment like binge eating or bulimia, then it'll be a different story. But look, everything starts somewhere, okay? This is a perfect storm of marketers, slavery, 300 years of, the ascension of sugar in like every single holiday and from birth to death. And like you said, everything in the 85% of the food in the grocery store has sugar in it. And they do it for a reason. The story's simple. It's like in the 80s, tobacco was getting hammered by the litigation by the states, and they started buying up the food companies and they started using their addiction model. They literally slide people into MRIs and you can see it on their brain scan, but they do it weaponized in a way that they're weaponizing it against it because they look at the stuff that's lighting up in your brain on the new product that they're putting out, and that they know that people will keep coming back to that product. And there's bunches of books about it. It's not brand new information. But at the end of the day, the quote unquote addiction part is with the people like I said, I've interviewed over 400 of the world's leading experts. And I used to be the chairman of the board of the Food Addiction Institute during the pandemic. And those folks have been working with late stage addicts for decades, right? Again, still languishing a little in anonymity simply because they were not recognized. But if you were to go down the list of what is required for, and I can't remember them all, but for an addiction, tolerance, doing the same thing over and over again, even though you're having adverse results like health and weight. There's a bunch of them. We check all the boxes. We definitely check all the boxes. Sugar checks all the boxes. And this is what I also learned at the Food Addiction Institute, and they had done, surveys of all their folks, is about a third of people, human beings, biochemically cannot ingest this substance without setting up cravings for more.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
Now, this tracks very well with the obesity numbers. About a third of people are obese, right? Now, you can be a very thin sugar addict, don't get me wrong. But we also have a second group called harmful users, which tracks really well, which is another third of people, which tracks really well with the overweight population of the United States, all right, in the world probably. But um, so yeah, I mean, I think the hard part is, look, you got brown eyes, I got green eyes, whatever. It just is. The ability to recover from alcohol or drugs or sugar is to accept the idea that possibly we are, in an evolutionary perfect storm, a wrong turn, that just like tobacco, we were not supposed to ingest this stuff. And you have to just accept it. And it's hard culturally. That's the problem. It's hard culturally. So, and I empathize with people. And look, one of the check marks in addiction is denial. It's the weirdest thing. It's one of the things I study the most. Denial and cravings I study the most because you just say to yourself, it's just sugar. And I hate that moniker. I hate the idea that because they think it's just sugar, that it's not as powerful as drugs or alcohol. But if you talk to someone who's lost 100 pounds, they did not change their diet. Yes, they started eating whole foods,
Yeah.
but they realized that they had to stop
Eating sugar.
using sugar to self-soothe. They had to learn other methods, walking, running, yoga, hugs, whatever. There's thousands of ways to self-soothe, but it can't be with a substance. Definitely this substance for those folks.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I so resonate with that, and a lot of the work that I do, I help women overcome binge eating, emotional eating, really
Oh,
through
okay.
regulating the nervous system.
Yes.
And it's interesting what you're saying, this need to soothe, because really we start binge eating, or even when we're noticing what are we binge eating, we're actually mostly choosing foods that are very high in sugars, foods that are processed, foods that are refined, very high refined in carbohydrates, because we're actually looking for safety. That's really what the nervous system is doing. And
Yep.
food on a very primitive level is safety for us. I mean, that's right after shelter, we're going to need food even before we start thinking about procreating, or we're going to need food. And so when we do learn how to cope, and I think that's the other thing that's really missing from our upbringing, missing from our conversations in society. How do I cope with my emotions? Why do I always need to escape my emotions? Why can't I sit in this discomfort? I'm about to go ask a girl out. Why can't I sit in this discomfort of
Yep.
asking a girl out? Why do I need this fake confidence to do it? And why is it that every single time we have certain emotions, the effect, or essentially the reward, is to use some sort of substance to soothe? So it's interesting, because I think there's many aspects to this conversation. There is the acknowledgement that, yeah, I have a problem, and a lot of us don't do that. You're right, we are in denial. But the other part of it too is learning, how can I start to actually mature my emotions and that emotional body, so that I am able to fully experience some of the uncomfortable things.
Oh yeah, I mean I mean it takes about the arc of a podcast to describe exactly what you're talking about. One of the statistics out there is that you know these as well as I do. 85 or 90% of the people, 95% I think is the actual statistic of people who lose any amount of weight, gain it all back in the first year. And then some, they add some. But this is very simple to explain through this, emotional soothing thing. And so, like, what happens is, say it's the first of the year, and it's your resolution and whatever, whatever. And, every diet book on the planet says to reduce the white stuff, whatever. Everyone that's ever been written says the same thing. And so you do it. And your life's good, your exercise is good, your kids are good, your spouse is good, your job is good, everything's good. Well, you lose 20 or 30 pounds. It's, April or May, June, July, whatever. And you're saying to yourself, you don't think to yourself, like I need a beer on a Friday because it's been a rough week. You know what you're doing. You're soothing yourself. You just say you're at your sister's wedding. You say, I've lost 20 pounds. Everybody's saying, you look so great. Don't worry about it. Have a piece of the cake. If I've heard this story once, I've heard it 1,000 times. It's
Yep.
like then there are just off because the cravings get lit back up in the brain, and you are soothing, likely not because you wanted to celebrate with your sister, but because your cousin was there and you've got a problem with your father and your uncle, and that you were worried about emotional entanglements in the family, and you just had a little bit to soothe yourself, to numb yourself. But it was very unconscious because it starts as children very unconscious. You're not doing it like a kid doesn't say, I'm mad at my mom and I'm going to go sneak a candy. They just say, I want a candy. You know what I mean? And then they feel a little bit better. And then they get programmed. You get programmed. And eventually at 14 or 15, it stops working and you find cigarettes or you find beer or you find pot or something. And that works a little bit better. And if you're uh, predisposed, and I don't believe in the genetics part of this. I believe that, it's in families. Like people are taught how alcohol is used in their family, how alcohol is used in their friend group, not necessarily their family, their friend group, right? But the result is the same. The goal is the same, usually unconscious, whether it's sugar or whatever. is that they just want to feel, they just want to check out for a few minutes. And just like any drug, it only lasts for 20 or 30 minutes and you got to re-ingest. You got to keep going. And it becomes a problem after a while, you know?
So good. Oh, so good. Yeah, spot on. Yeah, it's all learned behavior, and whether it's our parents giving us ice cream because we had a really bad day, or rewarding us with ice cream because we have a
Yep.
really great day.
Yep.
It's definitely programmed from such a young age. And what comes to my mind right now is just this predisposition that you spoke about, because you have a point. Not everybody, for example, has a drink and then suddenly becomes addicted, and not everybody will smoke pot or do coke and then becomes an addict. And the same thing with sugar. Not everybody abuses sugar in the same way. There are people who will binge, and sugar for them is really this all or none type experience and relationship,
Right.
while other people, they can have a piece of cake. I mean, my sister-in-law is a great example. I've never seen anyone, like never seen anyone do this. It's like a Ferrero Rocher chocolate. She takes a bite and then she puts it down, then she walks away and forgets about it. And I'm sitting there like, how do you not eat the whole box? Because that's my relationship with sugar. So
Right.
so what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, look, you're 100% right. Like the other third, the last third that I didn't tell you about was the normal people. Like we all hate, no, just kid, just like your sister-in-law. It's
Right.
like they just can have like your friend that can have one drink and, not don't think about it for a month. And that's just exactly the case in human beings broken down into those thirds. And look, it's not good, it's not bad, it just is. We have to accept whatever our biochemistry has thrown. And likely, when you get in the middle, it's an interesting group, the harmful users. And the harmful users are probably, they gained a pound or whatever, or two over the course since high school or college. Now that they're 20, 30 pounds overweight. And likely those folks can reset, get some abstinence. My only job in life is to let people see 90 days of abstinence for themselves and judge for themselves. It's not my job to tell you you're an addict. Anybody is an addict of any kind, you know what I mean? But definitely sugar is not my job. Anybody's job. It's your own. You have to make that decision yourself. But here's the problem. Most people can like not drink alcohol for a month. They don't even like they don't think about it, right? And so they don't have any worries that they're alcoholic or probably, it's the people that try and stop who can't. Like they say, I wanted to stop. I didn't want to get drunk at that wedding. No, 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 no. Same thing with sugar, okay? It's like if you can just most people have never even gone a day, let alone two or a week or a month or 90 days. They've just never done it. And when you ask them to do it, it's difficult. Like they're like they start craving and they're like, and they don't know why they're craving. They're like, they're smart. I mean, I've had multimillionaires, lawyers, an Olympic athlete, people that can do anything with their brain and their body and their success, but they can't do this because they don't know these little things that we're talking about, these little nuances that we're discussing here. They don't know that it biochemically might be not good for them. They just don't realize that. So, I mean, it's hard right now where we are in society because of everything we've talked about, not being listed as a real quote unquote addiction, right? But look, when you've done 10 plus thousand detoxes like I have and worked with thousands of people one on one, we're approved by the National Board of Health and Wellness Coaches. We're the first sugar group ever, definitely the first addiction group ever because to now it's just pattern recognition for us. Like I can tell right to the day almost when the common refrain, Sherry, is I'm losing my mind, Mike. And this happens right around between days 10 and 20, right about day 15. Because, okay, now they've been abstinent for 2 weeks, which they haven't been probably since the womb. And they don't have that one crutch, that one self-soothing method, right? And they don't understand it. They've never, like, without help and a guide, they will just fall back naturally,
That's
right?
easy.
They'll just take a cookie, they'll just take a soda, and they're off to the races again. But they got to get through that place. They've got to go walk. They got to run. They got to lift weights. They got to get a hug. They got to get a whatever. They got to self-soothe in another way, a practice, a meditation practice, a prayer practice. They've got to change how they look at what they were actually doing with the sugar.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, so good. The support is again so important because it's easy to stop Coke and not have it in your environment, but you stop sugar, it's still everywhere in your environment. So
Everywhere.
you definitely need that support. I'm curious when you say no sugar, just to be really clear, what do you mean? Because I'll tell you personally, I don't even eat fruit
Right.
because I find most fruit is actually very sweet. Once I took out the sugar and I would eat anything that was really sweet, it just actually made my whole mouth cringe, including fruit. So what do you mean by no sugar?
Well, I don't eat fruit either, or rarely, I do
Yeah,
occasionally, but it's only as a treat once a month.
yeah,
Um, Mainly because I always say my line is if you want to get off sugar, study fructose. And the
right.
fructose molecule for your audience is like half the table sugar molecule is glucose, half is fructose, okay? But the fructose in fruit these days is really hybridized for sweetness, which means it's hybridized for fructose, right? And the fructose molecule itself is identical in the fruit as it is in the candy bar. It's identical. The molecule does not change, all right? The problem is that fructose, the sweetness in general, even artificial sweeteners, the sensation of sweetness keeps the cravings alive. And who the hell wants to do this if you're going to be craving it all the time? You want to get to peace. So you forget about it. So it leaves your head. So you're not thinking, should I or shouldn't I? Should I, you just don't want that mental gymnastics that you have to go through. It's just a waste of your life, that free rent in your head kind of thing. And so I get a lot of pushback. You definitely can't drink fruit juice. You definitely can't eat dried fruit. You may be able to have a handful of blueberries or raspberries or something, low glycemic, low fructose stuff that will help you get through some of the withdrawals. And as a treat occasionally, if it doesn't, set up cravings for other sugars. But in the early days, I would suggest that you don't use those, especially, look, seedless grapes, seedless oranges, these kind of things, they cannot,
Right.
watermelon, they can't procreate in nature because they're a graft.
Yeah.
There's no seeds in them, and they're fructose bombs, just giant fructose bombs. And some are higher than others. Apples and oranges and these kind of things are higher in fructose than berries and strawberries and whatever. But for the most part, just let the information light on you. And just, I always like this N1 thing, this experiment, this like what if I teach anything, it's to pay attention to how you feel when you ingest anything, right? And only test one thing at a time. How are you going to figure something out if you're, having a candy bar or something with 17 ingredients and how are you going to know? You know what I mean? So it's like you've heard it a million times, but this elimination diet, eliminate everything now. And I call it heal up a little bit mentally and emotionally and physically. And then after 90 days, try one thing.
Hmm.
Try that big orange, see if it works. I guarantee you'll be craving a candy bar.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and most of our fruit right now is genetically modified, and to your point, modified to be way sweeter than
Right.
what it really is. Wild blueberries don't taste like the Costco blueberries that are this big and also very, very
Right.
sweet. So that's interesting. And then maybe as a final question, what are your thoughts on artificial sweeteners, monk fruit and stevia and all these things? It's also something I've removed. I've noticed when I would use monk fruit, first I would get that little high, but then I'd get a headache right afterwards.
Yeah. Headaches,
Oh
right?
my God, it was like like my brain felt like it got robbed of something. And then
Right.
it would just make me want more of it. And then I would even start using more quantities of it. So then I decided to just completely stop eating that. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, it's the same process. Like, when you eat an artificial sweetener, you get that sweet taste. And what the body's saying is, where's the calories?
Mm,
Like, where's the sugar? Like, where's the other part of this equation? And the same thing applies with the fruit is like, it keeps the cravings alive. It keeps them lit up. And it's not really like when you have a continuous glucose monitor on and you eat some of these ones that you're describing, stevia or whatever, monk fruit, it doesn't jack your blood glucose. So it looks like it's not, that it's okay. But in reality, the name of my book is The Last Resort Sugar Detox. People only come to me as a last resort. They only come to me when they've tried everything, right? And this is one of the things that they've tried, which is they substitute baking and drinks and everything with fake sugars. But it's just keeping the craze. So it's annoying. And they end up falling back because it is annoying and because you're reminded of the sweet all the time. And your body's like, where's the rest of this? Where's my calories? And where's my real hardcore dopamine hit that I get from sugar when I get sweet, right? This is your body talking, right? And so the problem is not necessarily a physical glucose spike or anything. It's really just this mental. And look, one of the things we didn't discuss, this is a brain illness, okay? They're calling Alzheimer's diabetes 3 now.
Right.
They're proving mental health changes without, when you change your diet and get away from these ultra processed carbohydrates and sugar. This science is expanding so rapidly, I can't even keep up with it. And so people need to realize again, I say this a lot, but it's not the sweet taste on your tongue. It's the dopamine hit you're after.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, one thing you said earlier is about the heroin and this and that. You have to separate the delivery system.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We share the delivery system of this drug with our food. It goes through our tongue and our mouth. The cruelest joke the universe or God, whatever you believe in, ever played on us is to make this stuff sweet and palatable and enjoyable taste wise. But make no mistake, it's not there. And its function, the reason you can't quit is not because it's a food product, but because it's a drug that is making you self-soothe just a little bit.
Wow.
That's this is the message, like I said, that takes about 30 minutes to kind of dispel this idea that you need to eat less and exercise more. That's not what it is. You need to literally heal your brain. This stuff shrinks your brain, period. There's MRI proof of this all over the world. So anyway, I don't want to get on a soapbox, but it's getting to the point where I have to get stronger with this message because I've been too, I don't want to say nice, but I've been too quiet about, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Yeah.
tens of thousands of people having success when they just give themselves a chance to have a little bit of abstinence.
Yeah. That was so good. That was mic drop worthy, my friend. And I know, you have something coming up too. You have a summit that's coming up. I know you also
Yeah.
maybe want to talk a little bit about your book. So maybe give us some more information around how we can be more empowered.
Yeah, I mean, the book is now free at the website, sugaraddiction.com. We brought it home from it. You can get a hard copy on Amazon. You actually get it free on Amazon if you want. Just the last resort sugar detox. Because I wanted to get the message out. I wanted to get more people. But what you mentioned before was the summit, is the Quit Sugar Summit.
Hmm.
And there'll be a link in the show notes. And it's coming up January the 6th. We have it every January. This will be our 12th one. And I've interviewed like 400, and Sherry's going to be on it, gang. So pay attention to it. Um, uh, I've interviewed 400 of the world's leading experts, everybody you can think of, and people you probably never thought of. Judy Collins, the famous singer, was on one time because she wrote a book about food addiction, right? And Robert Lustig. It goes on and on. There's no one you've ever heard of in the sugar world that hasn't been on, and each year it's a little bit better. So, and it's free, completely free for a whole week. It's like 40 or 50 podcasts over a 7-day period. You need almost to take a week off just so you can. It's like going to school full time, but it's wonderful. It's a community. There's on Facebook that there's along with being a real good bunch of education, and it's what it is the advancements in the science. Like this is not really public knowledge what I'm talking here. I mean, it's people don't think of it this way. It's just been in our world so long culturally that they don't understand it, And now the science is very clear and we're trying to get it out there more.
Yeah. That's amazing. I'm so grateful that you're doing this work and that you're sharing with us today. And I mean, on a personal level, I've seen such a massive transformation in my life just by cutting it out. And I tried for so many years and keeping the artificial sweeteners and keeping just the fruit. And the only way I really like, I don't even think about it. I don't even have these cravings anymore, was to just completely eliminate it. And so it's challenging to get started to do, but it's so beautiful to know that there's support here and that there
Yeah.
is a movement and we are becoming more aware. And it's, the more that we do it and the more that we talk about it and spread the message, the more we're just all able to participate together. So thank you again. And I really love this conversation, Mike. Was there any last thing you wanted to share before we concluded today?
Oh, that's a great question. Again, it's one of the things that's difficult, I will say, is that uh 80, well, I always like to say 80, but it's probably 90% of our folks are women between 40 and 80 or 90. And it might even be 50, and I like to get this to childbearing age women sooner or later, but I love the phrase, create your vision and play with who shows up. Now, this is who showed up. And I think it's because they struggled with dieting and weight most of their life. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because women really need this support system. And I don't know what's wrong with the men. I think women are smarter than men. But at the end of the day, like if this is something that's a problem, uh, stop judging by your failures in the diet world, in the diet industry, the eat less, exercise more. And everything that we've discussed here in the last 30 minutes is like, think of it more as an emotional, again, it goes back, and I didn't get to flesh it out much, but this um, idea that you've heard the term, and you may have even been a participant in practicing this emotional eating recovery. But show me an emotional eater who can't stop sugar, and I'll show you an emotional sugar addict. Okay. There's a slightly nuanced difference. And also I want to bring up that we didn't talk about is that in the eating disorder world, if you've gone through an eating disorder clinic or a program for binge eating or bulimia, they believe that you're not well if you can't eat sugar and flour in moderation, and they don't believe in the demonizing of one food. That's just flat out wrong for about a third of people. And I don't want people to be continuing to suffer because of this also needing to be changed world that is pretty much all of the eating disorder world, 90+% of it. And so those two things, the diet industry and the eating disorder world, sugar addiction is very real. And if you just give yourself 90 days, as Sherry has done and many others have done, then you will see the changes in yourself. And look, you can always go back. It's easy to go back. Just go to the 7-Eleven on the way home from the 90 day on day 91. So,
But you won't. You won't want
but
to.
you won't. I guarantee your skin will be clear. You'll be losing weight. Your brain will come back online. I'm telling you. I mean, it's kind of amazing, really, to see people Zoom, see people transform before your very eyes. Their face gets thinner, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this was one of my favorite conversations for sure, Mike. Thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom and your insight. We're going to have everything in the show notes, and we'll make sure that we also have your links. So,
Cool.
thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.